Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Best Practices Session 4. My name is Francisco Diaz. I am the viticulture specialist at Perennia. And between GGANS and Perennia, we are organizing these sessions to provide some information coming quite soon to tackle some activities happening in the vineyard or what will be happening in the vineyard. So this session, it will be a little compressed. It will be presenting mainly myself, and after we'll continue with our typical discussion between growers. So with that, I would like to give the word to Steve, the president from GGANS.
Well, welcome everyone to session number 4. As Francisco said, I'd like to thank Francisco and Perennia for making these best practices webinars possible. It's great in session 4 already. Where did the summer go? I think that's what we're all asking ourselves. Here we are at Veraison, and how did we get there? So I think we're going to talk a little bit about the season as it's gone by and some of the challenges and work into harvest and everything. So without any further ado, Francisco's going to take the weather portion because Jeff's on vacation. So we're going to listen to Francisco do the weather and a little bit of talk about what's going on in the vineyard. So go ahead, Francisco. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Steve, for the presentation. And good evening, everyone. Today, I will be presenting many different activities, and also will sell the part of Jeff Franklin. So if you have any questions, you can see on the bottom of your screen the feature Q&A. So if you have any questions, please type in the Q&A feature, and we can tackle them at the end. So for today's session, I will be talking about the weather summary provided by Jeff Franklin from Canville Research Station, and we'll touch the daily temperatures, degree days, and precipitation. After, we'll continue with the Veraison 2022 and touch the part of tissue sampling already published on the Grape blog. We'll continue with vineyard protection, physical barriers, and fungicides. As you can see, the disease pressure has been quite high this season. We'll continue with grape sampling, some considerations and methods, and harvest, important date and how to harvest, and the growers discussion to finish and round up this session. So let's start with the weather summary on 2022. So the daily temperature has been average to above average for most of the growing season in 2022. Temperatures for the month of June were near normal. However, late July and all of August up to the 24th, because then is the date that Jeff provided, have been well above average. So in this graph, you can see the daily mean temperatures plus the 10-year trend for the Canville Research Station in 2022. And in this last part, you can see a part of July and August, where you can see the above average temperature. Okay, so it's quite interesting to see how the year has been warmer than the previous ones. The daily temperature. In this graph, you can see the mean temperature from June, July, and August, and the mean temperature between June to August. And on the left, you can see 2022, the 10-year mean and the difference. So it's quite interesting to see how it has been increasing the difference, and especially in August, where we have plus 1.3 degrees Celsius, okay? And if we compare the mean between June to August, is plus 0.6. Just remember, the mean temperatures by month plus the 10-year for the Canville Research Station in 2022. So this data can have some difference depending where it's located, the weather station. The degree days, you have seen this information on the Grape blog, information provided by Jeff Franklin. It has been higher than normal. and have had a significant effect on the cumulative degree days. So currently, the degree days based 10 degrees Celsius are higher than they have been at any time over the last 10 years. The degree days are approximately 7 days ahead of the 10-year average. So late July and all of August up to the 24th have been well above average. And you were able to see that in the previous graph. So here you have the degree days, and on the red line, you can see 2022. And it's quite interesting to see how until last week, we were way higher than previous years, even higher than 2021, which was a quite warm year. In terms of precipitation, it changed a little bit. So the total precipitation for the month of June, July, and August are slightly lower than average. The greatest deviation from average was in the month of July, when Kentville received 37 millimeters of rain compared to the 10-year average of 91 millimeters. This lack of precipitation, combined with temperatures in excess of 30 degrees Celsius, created drought stress in some crops, okay, in some crops. And June, July, and August 2022 have had 30 days with rain compared to 10 years average of 38 days for the same time period. So in this graph, you can see the growing season precipitation for the Kentville Research Station in June, July, and August 2022. This is data up to August 24. So you can see how 2022 is slightly low than the mean, one of the lower years. The only exceptions are 2012 and 2016. I will mention a little bit more about the humidity throughout the presentation, but keep in mind that the precipitation was lower than the mean. So in terms of Veraison on 2022, some highlights. Veraison started approximately on August 14. In 2021, it was approximately on August 14 as well. And in 2020, approximately on August 15. When I said Veraison started, I mean the earliest hybrids. So and which can depend also in the location, because the same variety in different locations will behave differently. So weather conditions have been favorable to accelerate Veraison. Good temperature accumulation. We had a heat wave and lack of water impacted some vineyards. So you were able to see in circumstances how the vines were a little limp. They showed some water stress for a couple of days when we have the heat wave and lack of water. However, they were able to recover thanks to the precipitation. So this precipitation also helped the berry growth and the plant condition. So Veraison started quite similar to last year, which means that harvest is quite close. So it's important to remind that with a Veraison, it's also a good time for tissue sampling. We have two timings for sampling, which are bloom and Veraison. So if you were unable to collect at bloom, Veraison is a good opportunity. So considerations. It has to be consistent with the phenology. And please remember this, it has to be at Veraison, not 3 or 4 weeks after Veraison. It has to be at Veraison. Sample the same areas, just to be consistent in the areas as well, and keep separate samples from varieties, rootstocks, and specific areas. Blades or petioles, well, ideally both, and it depends on the nutrients. So petioles are easier to handle and to collect big quantities. Why it's important? Because it gives you specific nutrients, it can allow a good fruit development, and it can facilitate a good ripening. So remember, you have a leaf and you have to separate the blade from the petiole. So here you have the image of the hand with the leaf separate, the blade and the petiole. So teach you something, what to do. Evaluate the vineyard necessities and apply according to these values. So where I can find information? Well, we have the Grape Production Guide, which provides information. And in the guide, it's possible to find more literature if you're interested to search more detailed information. In this slide, you have the QR code, which you can scan with your smartphone and will give you direct link to the Grape Production Guide. The Grape Production Guide, you can find it on the Perennia website or also in the Grape blog. So let's go for vineyard protection. And when I said physical barriers, I mean nets, which it's ideal to have installed once you have reached a veraison in the vineyard. And this can be in different ways. So for example, here you have protecting mainly the fruit zone, and on the bottom, just to don't allow animals to climb. Here you have another type of net covering mainly the fruit zone and the top. And this one is going directly from the fruit zone and attached to the floor. So you have different barriers against birds and raccoons. But also exist another options, and you can be using kites, mixed kites with whalers, and in the case of the raccoons, you can use electrical fences. And pay attention with the detail that we don't have any weeds touching the fence, so the power can pass and move through the fence, and you don't lose that electricity, and it can keep the protection. So here we have another whaler installed in the vineyard with the solar panel, the battery, which allow and permits to have a constant sound to keep the protection. And this is a question that we have received more than a couple of times, how to make the proper connection of the electrical fences, which we'll be discussing more in the growers discussion. The idea is to combine different physical barriers to have a better protection or to have different ways to avoid having too many animals in your vineyard. This is another type of protection I already mentioned about in the part of the precipitation, that even though the precipitation was not very high, the humidity conditions were quite high, which gave us a high disease pressure, especially downy mildew. And it has been quite high sadly, until the last couple of days. So in the last part of the season, it's necessary to keep an eye on downy mildew, which is focused mainly on the top of the canopy. Okay, not the full canopy, it's mainly on the top of the canopy. So it's necessary to protect, to have a good fruit ripening and help to save reserves for next season. So here you can see how we are scouting on the top of the canopy and taking a look against the sun just to be sure how's the condition. So on the top, you can see that it's already drying the disease. And in this part, we can be sure that our fungal or spraying program is working in a proper way. So it's necessary to keep an eye on botrytis as well. And we have to focus mainly on the fruit zone, as this will be the part susceptible to the disease. If you have too many layers, keep an eye, because it's probable that you will have more diseases. If you have bunches with tight cluster, the same situation. So here you have a cluster of safe value. If you approach and get closer, you can see that you have some fungal diseases, because this cluster was quite tight, and the explosion and the environmental conditions allow it to the botrytis to develop there. So I would like to give some products for conventional and organic producers to keep in mind to protect the vineyard in case to have these diseases. Please pay attention. You have always to pay attention to the label and follow the indication of the re-entry time and the period before harvest, okay? Just to avoid any issue. So we have products like Kenya from group 7, Scala from 9, Luna Tranquility 7+9, Switch 9+12, Elevate 17, Miravis Prime 7+12, Pristine 7+11, and Inspire Super 3+9. So why I put the groups in brackets? Because you have to pay attention, because you have to rotate the products, and blend products, they can be followed by the same group. So for example, if you have Luna Tranquility, which is 7+9, you cannot apply Pristine because it's 7+11. The same with Switch, if you apply, which is 9+12, you can't apply Inspire Super because it's 3+9, okay? So it is not possible. Keep an eye all the time on the groups because it's necessary to rotate to avoid creating resistance. Also, it's important, as I said at the beginning, to see the label and pay attention to the re-entry time and the period before harvest. In the case of organic products, we have some options too, like Serenade Opti, Serifil, Timorex Gold, Regalimax, Double Nickel, and Sirocco. So the priorities will be the varieties with thin skin and tight cluster, such as Pinot Noir and Riesling. I put in brackets, I put in and start because these are potentially organic, but always check with the certifying body. And also, again, always read the label to see the re-entry time and the period before harvest. And also, these are preventive products, so you have to be applying before seeing the disease in many different places, okay? That's why it's very important to be scouting and take a look when you see the first symptoms. So, just to recap, we will pay attention only to downy mildew on the top of the canopy, while we'll see botrytis in the fruit zone. Now we go to grape sampling. This is grape or juice sample representative of the vineyard area or plot. So it can be a large variability of berry composition. So the improper sampling can be a waste of time and labor. You will lose that. It can give you the wrong date to have a premature or a late harvesting. So some considerations: random picking, not selecting. When you are collecting samples in the vineyard, they don't have to be all golden and well ripe. It has to be a nice combination. You have to keep track of the sampling location so you can follow the information and you can have a very nice tracking of how it's moving and progressing the ripening in that area. And for lab samples, as fresh as possible, okay? And sampling time and method, it will vary. So when 2 to 3 or 4 weeks before anticipate harvest date, okay? That it will depend with whom you are working and how much information you want to collect. How frequent? Well, it can be every 5 to 7 days at the beginning and more frequent getting closer to harvest. How? Well, exist different methods to choose from. So it's important to adopt the most practical method for your operation and be consistent to have good values. So some methods, well, it can be a bunch sampling. It can be a cluster branch sampling, or it can be individual berries, okay? It will depend, but it has to be from the whole property and in a way that you are collecting what is happening in the vineyard. So it can be 4 to 5 berries from each cluster. That's the classical way, collecting from the top, bottom, left, and right of the cluster. And collecting in total between 100 to 200 berries. So harvest. Harvest is a very important date, as we all know. And for that, it's crucial a good communication with winemakers and wineries. Please remember this, it's very important. They will provide you the necessary information of why they need that and how to proceed with that. And how to harvest? Well, it can be with cases, bins, and harvester. And again, it's important to discuss with the winemakers to decide what they want and how they want the fruit. So, as I already mentioned, it can be with cases or trays, bins, and a harvester. For people who haven't seen before, these are the trays or cases. These are different kind of bins and the harvester. I already mentioned, but I want to repeat it again. It's important to communicate with the winemaker or winery to agree, because they have to see how is the capacity in the winery and to define how they want and for what they want. So I would like to encourage you, if you have any doubt, because harvest it's coming soon, to communicate with the winery and tell them what they are expecting for this season. So now I'm finishing my presentation, and I would like to invite you to the discussion. This will be happening between Daniel Graham, the vineyard manager of Benjamin Ridge, and Steve Els, owner of Els La Farm. So stop sharing. So good evening, Steve. Good evening, Danny. Nice to see you guys. And as I have been presenting a couple of things about the weather, I would like to start with that because it sounds like a kind of contradiction that even though the precipitation was not very high, we have enough of very good humidity. So the disease pressure has been quite high throughout the season, or at least from the beginning of July, which is quite long. So Danny, I would like to start with you. How has been your spray application program throughout this season?
Pretty consistent. I think one of the important things is to know first and foremost the way your vineyard reacts. There's certain areas in the vineyard that can have different ways of responding that you become familiar with. There's indicator areas as well, but quite consistent. Tail end of June with excessive amounts of rain, and even going into those dry spells with relative leaf humidity being quite high, disease pressure was quite strong. So it's been definitely a very consistent spray season, not only for downy mildew, but you have to stay on top of other diseases, such for myself, organically, predominantly with black rot and other things like that, but also understanding the variations between an eradicant, a preventative, the groups that you were talking about, and really having a good kind of overarching lens of what's happening in your vineyard. So monitoring all the time.
Okay. And how is in your case, Steve? How it has been?
Yep. Yeah, consistent or constant too. It's been definitely been a challenging year, and you know, we've really had to roll through all the different products and everything. Have been very aware of what we were using. You know, and certainly we're kind of taking a blended approach to it, but it's been tough even using the conventionals. Like we found that because of the humidity, because of and the rain seemed to come in big showers a lot of times. So it was washing protection off, and then high humidity. So it's definitely been a challenging year. So we've really gone through stuff. And I know our vineyard supervisor, we were talking the other day, and we were kind of thinking it seems like we've been in high pressure for all the mildews since kind of like the first week in July. And it's been a challenge ever since. And I know that second week of July when it was so hot, Matt and I were saying, this is perfect powdery development weather. And I bet you we're going to see powdery in a month from now. And sure enough, we saw powdery starting to sneaking in. I've talked to a few growers that they've seen some sneaking in as well in the last 2 or 3 weeks. So powdery is not something we usually deal with a whole lot here in Nova Scotia, but it's definitely, if you haven't scouted and really looked at the bottom side of those leaves and some of your clusters, I think you should get out there, because it's been a challenging year for sure for the last couple of months.
Before continuing with our discussion, if somebody from the public has any question, I would like to invite you to write on the Q&A feature on the bottom of your screen. So in that way, we can ask to Steve and Daniel your question as well, and have some discussion. So I will continue a little bit with this topic because it has been quite high, a very long disease pressure. I heard that already Danny said that she saw some black rot. So comparing this season with the last one, how compare, how much pressure has been increased, or it's quite similar? I would like to know your opinions, or how many times more have you applied this year compared to last one? Danny, please.
I find at the beginning of the season and when we were starting, I thought, you know what, this is going to be like gently lower pressure than last year. This is going to be great. And that's what I was thinking at the beginning of the season. But as Steve said, and I will echo, right around the end of June, beginning of July, the pressure has been consistent. And I've actually found it, external precipitation being lower, to be much higher pressure this year. Usually there's a little bit of give somewhere in the season where you're not running such tight rotations or having to be almost hyper vigilant with the multitude of diseases coming after you. But I found this season to be quite a bit higher than last year, precipitation or not. It's been quite hands-on, and also too, some cultivars a little bit behind as well. And with the weather we have been having, like we're backing up against getting ready for early cultivars and hybrids for netting, but the disease pressure is still very high on things that aren't fully at maturity at all yet either. So it's definitely been very hands-on season to me and much higher pressure to me.
Steve, how's in your opinion? How many difference can you see between this season 2022 with 2021?
Yeah, it's funny because I would have thought it would have been about the same just with everything, but it does seem to be rounding out, and it seems like the diseases are hanging on. We usually think at this time when we're starting to put nets on, you're kind of winding down and you're thinking, yeah, okay, just get that fruit zone botrytis spray on, and then I can kind of take a breather and everything. But we're looking now from the rain we got just the other night. We got 23 mils over here, so I think we're just going to do a top canopy spray. We've got a little. It's not bad, but we're seeing some active spores of downy and powdery both, just kind of here and there, just in a couple varieties. So mostly in the Chardonnay. The hybrids seem to be, there's a little bit in the Lacadie, but the other hybrids seem to be keeping clean now. But it's been challenging, and the big difference I find this year from last year is that it just seems to be hanging on through late August a little more than it usually does. Usually we think of that being a little drier and not quite as much pressure coming up. But I would. It's probably a good year to do that one extra top canopy spray just to make sure you get through, right? Like if you're just kind of thinking about starting to put nets on right now, maybe run through and do a top canopy, as a separate spray away from your botrytis fruit zone spray.
I think something to keep in mind as well is to keep tracking of how many times are you applying and which products are you applying and which sections of your vineyard have been more susceptible to disease. So in that way, we can target and plan the next year. Okay, this is the area where I have to pay more attention, and this was the disease, and these were the conditions. Just like as an anecdote, I was comparing some notes from 2018, and Jeff kindly provided me some information from the weather and the same frame time of now. The conditions have been quite similar to 2018, and the disease pressure has been quite high. So these events, they repeat over the time. So it's good to keep track and keep your notes close so you can be fast to react when these conditions are changing.
Now, I got caught, Francisco, on looking at my notes a little too much this year with the cost of production up. We really went back through our notes and looked at what was super clean in other years and where we could maybe cut a corner here and there. So our Frontenac Blanc, we looked at the notes and looked at the spray program on it. It's always been super clean. We've never had anything sitting in there. We say, you know what? I think we could cut out that mid-season fungicide probably on the Frontenac Blanc. And just in the past couple of weeks, it hasn't been sprayed since set, and with a fungicide. And now we're seeing just the early stages of a little bit of anthracnose creeping into it. Nothing. There's no downy. There's no powdery. But I've never seen anthracnose in our vineyard before. So it's just like, oh, yeah, next year put that in the notebook because you can't cheat on that quite as much as we thought we could. So,
Steve, I tried to do the same thing just to levy up when you have so much acreage to spray. There's certain hybrids that you can kind of do a one-off to give yourself a little bit of leeway, but I found the same thing this year, and boy, did that ever catch up to me fast. So that for sure.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's very important. It happens that keep a track. Okay, next year I have to pay attention in that area. And anyway, it gives you some window to play with your cost of production. With everything super expensive, it's necessary to take some sacrifice. So thank you very much. It's very important just to show to everybody that everybody's dealing with the same issues and everybody has a different approach. And this has been a super tough year for everyone. It's very difficult. That's why in the Grape production guide, we were super repetitive in the please scout the vineyard 2 to 3 times, ideally 3 times per week. Downy mildew tips, just to keep an eye and be applying. And sadly, if it appears downy mildew, as Danny already mentioned, black rot can appear in some areas, or as Steve also said, a powdery mildew can appear. So it's necessary to keep a track, scout, and know which products are useful for a specific disease. So I would like to change a little bit the topic, unless you would like to finish with something else about the sprayers and the spray application.
I think the only thing I would potentially add on top of that is to spend time, even though the season can be erratic and the way disease incidences appear can be erratic, to really get to know the life cycle of the diseases and the pests you have in your vineyard, because you'll be able to pinpoint those inoculation points before they happen, or your critical points early season or whether it's late, and to really get a really good kind of working dictionary of the vineyard that you have.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. The other one I just remember too, Francisco, from your earlier slide when you were talking about some fungicides there and stuff, you listed Sirocco. I heard that people are having trouble finding that. But I mean, there's 2 or 3 potassium bicarbonate products. So I know, I'm not giving an ad, but anyway, just people are looking for it. I know Scotian Gold has some Millstop, which is basically the same product. So if you're looking for that eradicant type of potassium bicarbonate product, Millstop's a good option.
Very important to say. It's, as far as the active ingredient, it's the same. No problem with the name of the plant. So go for it. Thank you, Steve. So I want to close the spraying application, which has been quite high and sadly will continue for a while doing it.
I'd like to close it too.
I'm sure about it. Yeah. So something very important right now, because it's Veraison and many grapes are looking quite attractive, not only for winemakers, also for animals. So physical grape protection. So Steve, I took a lot of the photos from the nets, wailers, and fences from your vineyard. Thank you very much. So I would like to start with you. Which approaches are you doing with the physical protection in your vineyard?
Yeah, so we do kind of the first thing we do is put out a few kites. Like we kind of go one step at a time and keep adding things for the birds. Birds get used to absolutely everything. So we start with some kites for the birds and we keep moving them around. We only like to leave them in one place for a day or two. And then we'll add the whalers. We have a bunch of whalers scattered around. So we'll add them after a while, probably this weekend, they'll start up. And then, you know, as we work through that, we don't net too many of the hybrids because they come off early enough, but the vinifera that's going to hang a little while longer, especially the stuff going for still wine, all the Pinot and the Chard stuff, the Cab, we'll put nets on that for sure. And I mean, we kind of hang in there with some other things too. We'll put pie plates up or old CDs, like anything reflective. You can get reflective tape, I know, to put up, little streamers. All that stuff kind of works together. So it's kind of about just keep adding a few things, a few different things, and don't rely on just one specific thing for birds. As far as raccoons go, we put up the electric net fence all the way around the vineyard. We find it's the only thing that works. So we kind of, you know, we mow down. We don't like we don't use any herbicide, so we mow down really, really close to the ground, and then we put the fence. So we find it's really important to keep the fence as tight and as straight with as few corners as we can. That way it doesn't loosen up and go down and touch the ground as much. And the raccoons also have a harder time getting underneath of it if it's nice and tight. If they really have to push underneath of it, it'll usually roll back and get them on the back of the neck, and they really don't like that. So the connections, I know I've had 2 or 3 people talk to me about the connections, and those little spade connectors that Francisco had the picture of earlier. Those are what goes together. So I've been in vineyards and people are complaining that their fences aren't working, and what they were doing was putting those spade connectors on the top wire of the net, and that doesn't make a really good connection. It's pretty loose, and those plastic twines with a couple strands of fine wire through them, you're not always getting a connection on there. Sometimes it's just touching the plastic twine. So those spade connectors should go together in a nice secure fashion for those. The other little hint I'll give on the electric fencing is if you have metal end posts, or if you use a metal post in general, and anchors and everything at the end of your rows, run a jumper line from your ground over to the wire on your end post that's going down to your anchor. And that way if you've got metal posts, your whole row is acting as a ground for the electric fence, and you'll find that it'll work 10 times better. We usually just put 1 or 2 of the regular ground rods in, and then we run a jumper over to the trellis line, and we've got all metal posts, and they're all connected by multiple wires. So it runs up there really well, and it makes a huge difference. So that's something we've kind of learned over the years. Other than that, I mean, it's walk the fences, make sure the weeds aren't growing up through them. It's a lot of work, but it's worthwhile in the end for sure.
Yeah, I would like to stop a little bit in the fence, Steve, and repeat what you said. It's crucial to clean very well, or you are mowing or using herbicide, but it has to be clean. Otherwise, you're doing ground. The connection has to be done in a proper way. Otherwise, sadly, the fence will not give you the protection. So the raccoons will be doing some exercise, jumping the fence. That's all. And also keep in mind of how you're doing the connection, how you're making all around, because the idea is to have the power moving through, and that's the only way how you will have the protection. So thank you very much, Steve. It's also a typical question that you receive, and you see that the connections are doing in a wrong way. So Danny, how you do the things, or how's your way to proceed?
For the raccoon fencing, I have a lot of, actually, Steve. I haven't put it up yet, which is kind of risking it a little bit, but I haven't seen, at least at Gasborough yet, I haven't seen the damage from them yet. That's not to say that they can't come. And I don't know if you've noticed like a population decline or density, or maybe there's certain areas that are worse, but so far, at least for Gasborough, so far, knock on wood, I haven't seen them yet, but I imagine when they do come in, it's quite severe and it's quite drastic. External to that, it depends on like hybrid whites and things that you might be pulling at a higher acidity. Usually you're within a phenology range that the birds hopefully aren't there yet. So those things I typically won't net because of the labor resources that need to be dedicated to netting. It's exorbitant in terms of cost. Hybrid reds going for stills or things that really catch birds' eyes, like more pigmentation, I find is what they typically go after. And then anything that's going later in terms of vinifera, Chardonnay still otherwise, I'm putting nets on just in case. I also find too, it depends on geography. They all eventually come, but it depends also where you are. Like I'm finding towards Canning, towards Kingsport area and Port Williams that the pressure tends to be quite bad. much more than Gaspereau. Like there seems to be a variance in the terms of the way that they travel. They eventually do come to Gaspereau, but I have noticed that as well. So netting where possible, contingent on how much you have. And then external to that, we have bangers as well. So I usually will equip 3 or 4 people with them for people that are actively monitoring the vineyards, but just so I have them going off. And I will definitely echo with Steve that birds, their adaptive imperatives are quite strong. So they get used to things very quickly, and you have to be a little bit on your toes because they will normalize to things quite quickly and the efficacy won't be there the same way. And then external to that, we have whalers as well. And I have lasers going around the vineyard as a deterrent as well. So that's what we're using right now. And then just strategic netting because of the amount of labor it costs to get everything on. Like it's just an incredible amount of work.
Okay, it's interesting. So you are using as well whalers, but also lasers.
Yes.
So how you see the results? Only with the lasers? Have you tried only with the laser, or it's all the time combined?
I've done them combined, Francisco. They're not the lasers that are running from a higher pinpoint. I think actually Marcel from Laquette has them and he's utilizing those. They're ones that are mounted on top of the whalers, so they work in conjunction. But I would be curious to see how lasers perform on their own. I do have a gut feeling that they will eventually adapt to whatever you throw at them, though. I really do.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's the best is to have different strategies because the animals get used to it. So we have a question, and I will be asking to both of you.
Yeah.
If you have any knowledge about it, is what about dogs for deterring raccoons? Effective?
Steve?
No idea. But I mean, your dog would. It's nighttime when the raccoons are at their worst, so the dog would have to be awake and in the vineyard outside all night long. So I don't have any personal experience with it. We've had dogs in the past, but they're certainly in the house at night. So it might be effective, I guess, just with the dog around in the yard. I mean, wild animals will be leery of yards that have pets in them, especially the smells and everything from a dog. So it might deter them in a small vineyard some. Sounds great.
Danny,
Be a good excuse to get a dog.
I don't have any experience, but I would be curious I don't know if anybody's ever utilized like game cameras and stuff like that to monitor behavior at night. I don't have any experience with dogs, but I imagine it would be like a direct threat, right? Because of smells and stuff like that would be my best guess.
Yeah, I heard about dogs, but in another crops like corn, so they are providing the service just to be, and as Steve said, it's all overnight. So the biggest advantage of the fences that it's electrified all around the vineyard and you don't have nobody there, and it's quite effective as far as we know in grapes. But it's good to know that exists other alternatives.
We've utilized dogs for bears in the Okanagan before. That works well. So I bet you it would work for raccoons.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I know they have been using in corn here in the valley and with positive results.
Awesome.
So I'm closing the part of the physical grape protection, and I would like to jump to something that not many people consider, but it's quite important, and it's grape sampling. So Danny, do you use grape sampling? Which information you use from here, if you can give us some hints.
Yeah, so I will start doing kind of like maturity monitoring as we approach Veraison, and we work our way into the second stage of fruit maturation. So I will just go, around the vineyard with a basic refractometer to measure bricks. It can be nice to see all 3 measurements, but I don't always get that with what I have. And then of course, as you get a little bit more into the ripening process, having more detailed formats of measurement that might be undertaken at the winery to read things like pH and other directives that will guide the progression of that fruit is definitely happening as well. But I've started, and I'm probably on my 2nd or my 3rd in some areas. I tend to be a little bit more keen in getting out there. And I think usually, on average, as a potential standardization, maybe you can raise 2 degree points in a week or something like that based on weather. But I like to do it quite consistently as soon as we reach into Veraison, and I like to chart it as well to see how quickly development happens.
Perfect. Steve, do you collect samples? Do you have a different way to proceed?
Yeah, well, we coordinate with the winery that we're dealing with and see what they're expecting from us on that. So our first berry sampling is very basic. While we're scouting, we pop one in the mouth and see where it's at. It's just a nice way to kind of see where the berries are at. But we'll start with the refractometer pretty quick. It's funny this year, it's really snuck up on us. Like usually
Yes.
I don't really think about doing that until the 1st of September. And then I, kind of that second week of September, you think about really starting to sampling. But I know I was working on raccoon fence today and around a block of Lackadie, and they're beautifully blushed and pink now and everything. And I popped one in the mouth like, oh, I really should go get the refractometer because there are some bricks in this now. It's starting to get some flavor. So
I have hybrids at 18, Steve.
Wow. Okay. You convinced me. I got to get my refractometer, and I'll send you a picture tomorrow of what I can find. So, but yeah, we'll go from the refractometer much the same, and then closer to harvest. I usually try to get it pretty close to harvest specs, and then take about 150 berry sample and run it out to the winery, and they can analyze it, and then we'll end up taking a couple of those per block as it comes up to harvest, and see when the trigger date is.
Okay, yeah, different ways to proceed and collect samples. I would like also to remind you and all the attendees and the people watching this session that Acadia has a wine lab, a lab, and there is possible to have different analysis. They have a package for harvest. So it's quite interesting. They will measure actually, not only the sugar with the refractometer. They will provide you pH, acids, YAN, which is the yeast assimilable nitrogen, the main acids, malic acid, tartaric acid. So, and they have different packages. You can see even which are the potassium levels, calcium, magnesium. So I will recommend you, if you have the chance and you have the opportunities and you want to know more how is the ripening in your grapes, to proceed with a lab. It's quite neat information, and they can help you to take decisions in the future as well, like nutrient management decisions. Okay, that's something important to consider.
So, for sure, and the YAN, Francisco, I mean, that's a great way to see if you're got your fertility management, if you've got your nitrogen level dialed in exactly where it needs to be. Because I mean, that's another thing we talked about, cost of production, right? So that $25 sample or whatever it is this year at A Lab, I mean, if you can dial in your nitrogen additions, 5, 10, 15%, that's probably going to pay for that sample pretty easy. So always more information is good.
Yeah, and the same with the cations, which are potassium, magnesium, and calcium. They also have a package to measure that. Grapes are one of the crops that uptake more potassium, and especially from the grapes. So knowing how much potassium, it can help you to tailor even more precise how much potassium needs your vineyard. So as Steve already said, it can possible to diminish or increase depending how is the situation. So some good tips to keep in mind. So we have grape sampling. And because this is the last session, we will not be able to talk for harvest. So organizing harvest, this is something very crucial, very important. This is the work from all year long, and it's very important for the wineries to have the best quantity and quality. So Danny, I would like to ask you, what are you expecting from growers, or which kind of communication, which are the important factors to keep in mind?
I think harvest in a lot of ways comes down to logistics and organization. Of course, it depends where contract growers may be. There's also a huge part on the winery as well to stay in consistent communication, as there's a dialogue there from an educational standpoint that is beneficial for both parties. So I would say, coming in with concepts of yield estimation is good because it'll set up the winery with a projection for capacity for what's going to be coming in during harvest, and then maybe simple refractometer measurements as we get to those intervals and we get closer to harvest. So everything's kind of leading into that opening and preparing, and then if we have an idea of what's going to be coming off that particular site, then we have an idea of bins needed or the type of vessel needed for that site. So then there's logistics on our end to make everything kind of coordinate and make everything work. I think harvest is usually always about teamwork, clear and concise communication, and willingness to to work together, because things can fluctuate, things can change.
Yeah, very important. I think you said the right word. It's teamwork, because it's the coordination between both parties to be successful. So Steve, anything that you would like to provide with your experience, or what for you it's very important to keep in mind all the time?
Yeah, well, you can't emphasize that communication piece enough, like just the talking back and forth. And there's, I mean, certainly being aware most of the winemakers are very busy on the press pad. There's a lot of things going on, a lot of balls in the air. So there's a great fine line there between being communicative and nagging. So just make sure, just be aware there's 20 other growers that they might be talking to, or whatever, 20 other vineyard sites that they're thinking about, including their own. So there's a lot going on, but certainly keep them aware of what's going on. That coordination, make sure, that, if they're providing bins, or really if even if you have your own bins, for them to be aware of how many tons a day you're going to pick is super important. Those presses only take so much, and it's all built around press time, press periods, press cycles. So, if they've got a 7-ton press and you take them out 9 ton, they've got 2 ton of grapes sitting on the pad for a period of time that they don't really want them sitting on the pad. They'd be healthier to stay on the vine. So all that coordination and being realistic in what you have on the vine and what you can pick in a day is I think maybe a really nice thing to focus on a little bit for the winemakers and the wineries.
Yeah, it's super important what you said. The winery has certain capacity. So it's not that they don't want to receive the fruit. Well, first, they want some parameters. And second, they have some capacities just to be processing at the time. So yeah, I think both of you are completely right. It's teamwork, communication, and try to be patient as well, because the people at the winery, it's taking time to answer. It's not because they want to take time or be the special ones, it's because they are busy as well. So I think it's very good, important. I will highlight, repeat, even though it's super redundant. Communication is key to succeed for both parties. So my last question for you, Danny, would be, and it would be for you as well, Steve, it's how you prefer the harvest is, or which is the preference? It's with trays or cases, with bins, or a harvester? Do we have any difference in between them?
I think, I mean, there's different formats of harvesting contingent on different types of quality or different types of wines being produced. So that can be an expression of mitigating or how you're going to be harvest. For example, a traditional method sparkling might not be something that's put through machine, especially if it's an upper tier wine. So there's that to take into consideration for quality measures. And I think when it comes down to quality measures, for sure, tighter, smaller vessels and by hand has exemplary results in that way. I tend to be a really big fan of the quarter-ton bins because for logistical reasons, but I also find them to be very efficient to work with, and they give you that higher quality. And then for other things, like bins can be a lot more efficient. Again, it depends, right? It's not only choice, it's also, again, cost and labor as well, right? And then machine harvesting is beautiful, is probably one of the more efficient ways to pick, but it's not always fit for every type of place and every type of wine and every type of grape, right? So there's intricacies, and it really depends what the the destination of those grapes is going to be and what type of tier wine it's going to be as well.
Perfect. And Steve, which is your opinion of the different methods to proceed, and how is in your perspective as a grower in the vineyard?
Yeah, well, it's certainly the form of harvest has to be in line with the expectation of the winery and what the grapes are going to be used for. So there's always that caveat. I mean, as a grower and just for efficiency and cost of production, everything, the harvester's great. You can come in and harvest 25 ton of grapes in an afternoon, and that block is gone. It's fantastic, but also it has to be appropriate. So, I mean, straight up just as efficiencies, the harvester's great. For hand picking, we like to use, I like those 250 to 400 kg bin size is nice. The 800 kg bins I find is too tall to dump over. We have people complaining about that. We use the bucket to the bin method, which is we pick in buckets. Everyone has 2 buckets, and we pick in buckets and then dump them in the bins, keep moving the bins along. It's a pretty standard practice, I think. We do pick in trays for a couple different high-end wines with some of the Pinot and Chardonnay. So they all work. I think Danny said it right. It just has to be appropriate for what the grapes are going to be used for. So, and we do all 3. So we do buckets and bins, and we do trays for some products, and then we have a bunch of our hybrids are done with the machine. So we use them all. They all have their place. It's actually sometimes, this is going to sound crazy, it's actually sometimes nice to change it around, because you've been harvesting the Chardonnay or whatever for in the bucket to bin for a week or 2 weeks, and then it's like, oh, we got to do high-end wine today, so we're switching to trays, and it's but it doesn't take long to get sick of the trays picking them up, but it is a nice change up. So we do them all. They're all fine. You just have to be aware of what you're doing. Yeah, try to stay efficient.
Yeah, I will reinforce what Danny said, that depending on the wine, the goal, and the tier, and which is the end, it will be very crucial to define how to harvest. So that's why it's important to reach the winery, discuss with them how they want to proceed, because everything has a reason. It's not because it's a wish, it's because they need for their procedure and the final product. And at the end, it will be the quality, and it will be the prestige, and it will be impact in a positive way to everyone. So with this was my last question. Thank you very much, Danny and Steve, for this interaction. It was quite good. We touched the sprays, which has been quite high, the disease pressure this season, how to be protecting the vineyard against the animals or diseases too. Grape sampling, which is very important to take decisions, and the harvest, which is coming in through this month, which is already September. So it will start sooner rather than later. So Steve, if you would like to give some words to close this session.
Yep, and I'm just going to add one more thing, Francisco, that we didn't say is if you do have whalers and bangers, you should contact NSDA and let them know you're going to be using them. They are supposed to be registered with NSDA. You can just send one of the regional reps like Jeff Wenzel here in our area, just an email, let them know how many you have, what properties are going to be on, and kind of your estimated start date on using them. So that is something to be aware of.
Thank you, Steve.
Yeah, I texted Jeff the other day. So Other than that, thanks everyone for tuning in. Thanks very much for Danny for tuning in. So it was a great discussion. And Francisco, as always, thanks very much for putting this together. I know you do a lot of work. It seems simple at the time, but there's a lot of behind the scenes getting these organized and the presentations together and just getting the notices out there and everything. I know you put a lot of work in this. So one thing from the summer tour that's just gone by, I heard from a lot of different people how much they appreciate these best practices and how much they appreciate you putting them on. So very much appreciated. So other than that, thanks everyone for tuning in, and I hope everyone has a fantastic harvest, and we'll see you all soon.